So my name is James Herring. I'm a big data architect with the Global Black Belt team with Microsoft. I've been doing MPP solutions, data warehousing, and all this fun stuff for about 25 years now. So today we're going to discuss 475, and there's a lot of changes with 475 that are on the site that may not be in the exam. And if you take the measure up, I haven't taken it in the last month, but we're going to see, I think you'll see some changes there. Mostly if you see questions around machine learning, I would go ahead and be cautious that they're probably not on the actual exam. So, and if you see something in this deck that's still machine learning, I had to kind of modify them between the breaks here. So some of the sessions and takeaways I want you to get is really to help you prepare for the exam, both kind of mentally and what to study for, especially when we're talking about Azure type solutions, HD Insight, that kind of tool. We're not talking about an IaaS Hadoop cluster here. We're talking about HD Insight, big data solutions, and that kind of thing. Also want to know you to know the areas to be familiar with when we're talking about Lambda architecture. We're going to discuss that, the differences between an AWS type, really more focused on Microsoft type solution, and then learn how to study the right material and some topics with that. So from 40,000 feet, this exam is really targeted towards the data management professionals. That's the data architects, data scientists, scratch the data scientists. Unless they're actually doing some Jupyter notebooks, they might see some of that stuff going forward. But it's really for the data developers, data architects, big data architects, that kind of stuff, who design big data solutions and implement big data solutions in Azure. So the candidates for the exam are going to be people that have that relevant experience. This is not for the faint of heart exam, I would say. Let me move this real quick. So I wanted to show really some of the changes. There's a 473 exam as well, and both of these are part of the MCSA, track MCSE as well. And 473 is really about designing and implementing cloud platform solutions. It's also had a lot of changes, so I would check those out. And one of the big changes with 475 here is, again, the implement machine learning, which formerly was Azure ML, which now I think you guys know there's a preview of what we call Vienna, which is a new workbench that's Python-based, which is really cool. So it does more stuff, and it has a scale-out deployment. But we're really going to focus on the 475 piece, but I would encourage you, if you're wanting to go down the MCS, E-Track, MCSA, that these two are pieces of it. So the exam basics, just from a high level, there's 50 to 60 questions. It's going to take you, it says 2 to 3 hours. I would say probably an hour to 3 hours at most. You can review all the questions except the scenario-based solutions. So those would be the case studies. Once you go through a case study, you'll see 1 or 2 pages of the case study, and then you may have, say, 15 questions that will be listed directly to that. You can go back within that, but you have to be careful, because once you go forward and say accept, you cannot go backwards from that point. So all those questions are locked in. But every other question outside of a case study can be flagged, and you can review them later. So that's a big piece. This is no longer a beta exam. That actually doesn't apply anymore. An exam tip, I know it goes without saying, but mark what you're uncertain of. Come back and review it if you have time. So it's easier to go back and see it. So the exam scoring has a cut score. Each question's worth 1 point. You don't get points deducted for a wrong answer. You get points added for correct responses. None of the questions are designed to trick you. I say that, but if you look at some of the PowerShell scripts that are in there, the syntax will be almost identical to some of those, and you do have to know exactly what you're doing with those. They're not designed to trick you. They're just designed to make sure you understand that. I guess take that with a grain of salt, right? There's no partial credit, meaning if you have a multi-part question and you miss one section of that, the entire question is wrong. You get no points for it. If you have a multi-select, which you'll see quite a few of these on this exam, you will have a scenario where you may have to implement something, and you will have to drag from the left side in the proper order to the right side in a sequence of events. If you leave one off or you get one out of order, you get no points. So, but there are no points deducted for the wrong question being answered. So that's a positive. Tip, answer all the questions. Even if you're taking a guess, you need to answer all the questions. The questions on these, it's an adaptive-based questioning. So within each section, if you start missing a certain element or you're strong in a certain element, it's going to actually jump into that. And you may be through a section very quickly. I've actually taken the exams and not gotten through all the sections because I got enough points right, I guess, up front. So once I hit that point piece, I was done. Don't worry about the scoring on here. Pass is pass. That's all you care about. Nobody's going to see your score. This isn't a GPA that you're going to have to take back and measure. So, and some people don't realize that. So it's not designed for that. So like I said, those 4 sections, this has now been reduced to 3 sections. So the sections went from 20 to 25% scoring to 30 to 35%, basically. First section is design batch-based processing and interactive solutions. This is really about where you're going to land the data, the big data, I should say. So when we talk about Azure storage, you really need to understand the different types of blobs, when to implement them, which types. And when we're talking about blob, we're talking about WASB, right? Windows Azure Storage Blob. Understand that a table may be good for a rapid type if you're doing, say, like a key value pair, table type storage, versus a block blob, which may be something that you land for more of a batch-based processing. You could actually implement that as well for, say, Event Hub, if you have something like that going on. But a table storage, if you're thinking of like a MongoDB type, then you're going to want to use a table type storage within the blob. This says HD Insight, and that's really understanding that whether or not it's a primary storage mechanism or not, depending on the versions of HD Insight that you implement, it can be primary storage has to be a blob storage versus has to be, or can be a data lake storage. You guys are familiar with that, right? So data lake can be a primary store for HD Insight types, which is great because it helps with the HDFS and in the back end it's true HDFS versus a web HDFS, which is WASB. So it's important. Azure SQL, you're going to want to know when to use Azure SQL, what the limitations of that versus an IaaS type of implementation of SQL versus like a SQL data warehouse. Because there will be elements in here where you span across both of those as well. And then SQL Server IaaS and VM, of course, that has more control, but it also throws more responsibility and onus on you as well. It's more of a DBA, DBO versus a PaaS where it may be just DBO, right? And then Document DB, which is now named Cosmos DB, right? Everybody knows that? Cosmos DB, if you haven't played with it, it's great. It's getting even better by the day. And if you are on Instagram and you want to follow a very active product group, look for Rima Nimi. She's the program manager for that, and she is on a stick. I mean, she's awesome with getting the data out there, articles and everything else. So when we're talking about data ingestion, we're talking about a couple things. How I want to handle, say, a one-time bulk copy. So if I'm just taking data and I'm moving it to the cloud in a big data area, how do I land it, where do I land it, and then how can I access it later after that. You also want to understand the on-premise versus cloud solutions, and hybrid is definitely something that you're going to want to look at if you're thinking about some type of bursting elements, which pieces of HD Insight are good for that if you want to be able to use Jupyter notebooks, which pieces of HD Insight are good for that, like Spark or R, and getting into that. And then what is the appropriate directory structure for processing? And I've got some other slides that we can dig into this a little bit more. But this just kind of shows some of the automation elements over here where we've got Azure Data Factory. You will see Azure Data Factory on this exam. Has anybody taken this exam? No? It's not a bad exam, but it's not a straightforward exam either because it covers a very broad breadth of different technologies here, as you can see. PowerShell scripts, you're going to see quite a few on configuration. You're going to see quite a few data factory type scripts. You may even see an ARM template. You're going to see JSON for sure on some of the configuration. SSIS, I haven't seen any SSIS on this. I don't even know what's on here. because when we put this exam out and when it's been updated, the SSIS and PAS offering is still in preview. So log files, Flume, SSIS, that's probably where the SSIS came into, but I haven't seen any questions on this exam that pertain to log files other than configuring how to access them. That's the only thing I've seen on it. Some of the relational stuff, polybase, you will see polybase questions potentially on this exam. With the advent of polybase being able to access data lake as well as blob store, it's become a little bit more prime time, especially when we talk about SQL Data Warehouse or SQL 2016. It can access a data lake from on-premise, in cloud, IaaS. And when I say in cloud, I'm not talking about Azure DB, SQL DB, just SQL Data Warehouse. So make sure you understand the differences with that. The configuration, though, is almost identical for each one. It's a very small difference in how they're configured, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. And then interactive. PowerShell, AZ copy. I know the microphone's going in and out, sorry. So AZ copy, I've not seen anything that's specific to AZ copy, except you may need to be familiar with what it is. PowerShell, definitely, you're going to see some PowerShell. XPlat, I haven't seen any of that. Visual Studio, very little. Hadoop command line, I've seen some switches. Outside of that, nothing big on it. Again, the scenarios are around ingesting data. You're going to see scenarios that are kind of event hub driven that may give you scenarios, say like, I don't know a specific one, but I would say that the scenario I could imagine is something like a, one of the kiosks where you go to, well, the tollways you guys have here in Florida, right? So you go through the tollways and each toll station's collecting data. And you're talking about hot and cold data, streaming data that's coming in, being staged and then aggregated later. You're going to see that, and we'll see that in a slide here in a second. Considerations with Azure Data Factory. There was a new release, I think, this week on Azure Data Factory, some new updates, so it's got a little bit more flexibility, functionality. As much as you may hate it, it's not going away. Data Factory, I think, is going to be here for some time, and it's getting better. If you guys would have saw it a couple of years ago, you'd love it now. So it's not a bad thing. Data Management Gateway, again, one of the kind of the necessary evils. It's not nearly as bad as some of the tools, but understanding how it sets up a key and how it accesses a local domain. Even we've seen implementations of this. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Data Management Gateway. It's required in some cases. In other cases, if you're doing an appliance-based solution, it may actually be installed on an appliance out of the box. So when it's delivered from a manufacturer like Dell or HP or Quanta, if it's an APS type solution, it's going to have Data Management Gateway installed on it. The key thing with Data Management Gateway is understand you can only have one installation on a particular server, right? You can access a lot of different servers from within that Data Management Gateway, but it's almost like an application server, an edge node, if you will. It's an access point. But understand some of the caveats with that. And then storage management, where you store keys, key vault, that kind of stuff. You'll see some questions about it. They're not going to be major type of questions. And then shared access services, for sure. Understand a different type of clusters. You guys play with HD Insight now? Anybody? No? Oh, wow. Okay, so if you do play with HD Insight, you're going to see that there's a couple that are in preview. Be careful with that, because if you're looking at Kafka that's in preview, there are Kafka questions on this exam that have nothing to do with Kafka in preview on HD Insight. They are Kafka questions. You will see that on this exam. If it's Interactive Hive, which is also in preview, I've not seen any questions on it. You'll see it mentioned, but you'll see nothing specific asking you to answer a question about it. You will need to know about just Hadoop in general, some Hadoop questions, Apache Spark for sure. HBase, Storm, and then our server on Spark, which is something that's been in preview for a while, but is also released now, has been for a couple months. So understanding not just that they're available, but understanding, again, when you're talking about where to store the primary store, whether it's in data lake or blob storage, is important there. And really what each one of them is for, right? If you're talking about Spark, you're talking about in-memory data analytics, that kind of stuff. How you may access it, maybe a Jupyter notebook may be the best way to access it, but there's other ways as well. You're not going to see really, really deep questions on the specific technologies within it. Nothing that's really hard. So when we're talking about Spark, you're talking about, again, in-memory computing, easy ingestion from Blob Store. The interactive reporting, Zeppelin is still supported. You may have to install it yourself on an edge, but Jupyter is usually installed out of the box. And if you've played with any of the other tools, third-party tools like Redbrick, Jupyter is kind of an inherent built-in piece of that. Also understand the concurrent user processing. It's an HDFS behind the scenes, right? Each one allocates a certain amount of memory, and they can run interactively without stepping all over each other. They've got their own caching mechanism built in. Understand the SSDs, more expensive. They also come in kind of pre-packaged sizes. I think 32 gigs is the minimum. So you need to understand that if you have a processing unit, you're building a Hadoop cluster, but you need that performance, you can reduce the cluster size, but your cost may actually be the same as if you were a larger cluster. In practice, you're not going to see that on the exam, but in practice, look at the guidance around configuring a Hadoop cluster in an optimal way, especially if you're talking about data lake and blob storage. There are different configurations on the number of, say, blob stores that you want to configure to a size of a cluster that's going to actually be important. And again, like I said, you will see Event Hub and Kafka on here, but it is not the same Kafka that's an HDN site. It is a regular open source implementation of Kafka, not HDN site. Sorry. HBase, this is like Google Big Table. It's a NoSQL database. It's good for random access, unstructured, semi-structured. I think big data in general, when we're thinking about big data, we're talking about semi-structured, unstructured data to begin with. Not a lot of relational structures per se. Doesn't mean you can't store relational structure within a Hadoop cluster or in a blob store. It's just the access and how we retrieve the data. If a user were to go and navigate in a Hadoop cluster, if you haven't seen it, it's not pretty. The way it's sharded and broken apart, it's not pretty. Data Lake, on the other hand, is an HDFS, and if you store the data and you upload it as a user might, then you're going to see a much cleaner file type structure, but underneath the covers, it is a full HDFS. Blob Store is very similar to Data Lake as well, but it's a web HDFS, and as you take the containers and expand them out, it's only increasing basically a file share at that point. It's actually a very flat distributed structure. You don't need to worry about that on the exam. Just as a practical manner, if you're navigating it, it's a container type structure, but it's very flat in nature. HBase, again, good for scale out, sharding of tables, in-memory caching reads. This is, again, high flight developer type things where they want to do key value pair type of structures, sensor data, real-time queries, that kind of thing. So another components, utilities, when you use Scoop, Ambari, of course, if you do implementation of HD Insight, you will probably see an Ambari type of screen in this exam potentially. It's not going to be as pretty as Ambari, even though Ambari is not actually that pretty, but it's not going to be in the exam. The graphics on these exams are not as nice as 1990 or so. HCatalog, Templeton, understand when to use what each one of these components are used for. And of course, Uzi, that kind of stuff. I would say if you're looking at a lot of these tools in the exam, is understand that if you take, have you guys taken the measure up exams? So the measure up exams they're really good on the content. Where they're actually lacking is, be careful, and I'll say this all the time, if you've not taken a certification exam and you have the time and maybe the expense to go and take it, just a practice exam, go and learn the area that you're going to take the exam at. Learn the place and the location that you're going to take it at. Because if you study with Measure Up at home on 327-inch monitors, you're going to be sorely disappointed when you go to this testing center. It's going to be like a CRT 11-inch monitor, and you're going to be panning left and right. And if it's the same place I go to, I told the last session, they were literally drawing blood in the same building that I was taking my exam at. It's something they do on the side. It's not a primary thing for them, and the equipment's going to be dated. And they're going to give you an 8.5 by 11 that's laminated piece of paper and a marker that's way too big to take notes on. And they will not give you another piece of paper until you give them that one. And they take everything you have that's removable and they lock it in a locker like you're going to steal everything out of the place. And it's really impactful on how you perceive the exam and that kind of stuff. So if you have the chance, go take it, learn the environmental variables, because you don't want that to impact how you take the exam or mess with your attitude and anything else. So that's just my tip. Because it's frustrating. It really is. And make sure you take 2 forms of ID, too. So know the technologies, frameworks, and use. I would say this from a high level. Don't go and not understand what pig is. You don't have to know the language, the syntax, where its origins are. Know what it's used for, know what Hive is, Python, Flume, have a general understanding of it, and how they apply. MapReduce, not so much now, right? Even Yarn. A couple years ago when this exam was out, you probably would see some MapReduce code. Now I've not seen anything that's even close to MapReduce. So it's not that bad. PowerShell, yeah, unfortunately you're gonna see a lot of PowerShell. And I say unfortunately because PowerShell is a great language, it's a great scripting language, but it's a niche language, right? A lot of admins know PowerShell. DBAs are starting to pick up PowerShell, but within Azure, the resource management ARM is starting to kind of take over, and that's a JSON-based structure. But it's got some advantages in its deployment capabilities that PowerShell just doesn't have, right? So, and I would say that keep abreast of that, because that may even be changing in the next 6 months to a year. That's open source, right? That's what we've accepted as part of this culture. When you think solutions and scenarios, this is really where you're, I'm sorry, was there a question? Yes.
What do you refer to as a PowerShell counterpart?
Oh, Azure Azure Resource Manager, ARM. Yeah, the JSON-based. What that gives you, though, is the ability to actually use Visual Studio for deployment and for code comparisons and that kind of stuff. But it's a templatized, like, version of JSON, right, for deployment. And there's a whole chef and all that stuff that has a library of deployment scenarios where you can just easily modify them. And if you do something like Ranger with Apache, with HD Insight, you have to use an ARM template because it uses some older technologies because of the Kerberos authentication on that you can't actually use the panels and stuff, the blades within Azure, to actually deploy it yet. It's coming, but currently you have to use scripts to deploy it.
Is there a CLI component to that as well?
There is, but I've not seen any CLI pieces really on the exam. So when you're thinking about solutions and scenarios, think about, like, I have sensor data that's coming in, right? It's coming in very quickly in near real time. And also consider, like, do I need to respond to that sensor data, right? Do I need to respond back to that device that communicated with me? And that's going to tell you whether you need, Event Hub or not versus what the IoT Hub. So if you need Event Hub and IoT Hub, one can communicate back and forth, the other one can't. It's bidirectional versus unidirectional. And then if you're thinking about large historical volumes that you want to be able to look through it semi-structured, you may want to create, say it's a fully denormalized structure, and within it you have a dimensional model, and you have to pull that out. That's really where you're talking about like a Hadoop, a Hive, and then maybe even Excel. It's amazing Excel was supposed to die, what, 20 years ago? Still kicking, right? It's actually expanding, I think, in a lot of cases. So, and it's a key component, because when we think about deployments with it in the real world scenarios, we may have a Hadoop cluster on the back end, but customers are still, users are using Excel for everything, right? That's what people learn on if they're doing this. So, and then think solutions. Sorry for the slides. Before this session, my slides got kind of muddled. So, I had to repair them quickly. This is a solution scenario, right? And I wish it were going to look this easy on the exam, but it's not. This is going to be one of those solutions that's probably going to take 2 pages of describing the solution, and this is where the note paper really comes into play. The first scenario question I got on this exam, I filled the front and the back, had a model built, and I ran out of space. And I hadn't even gotten to the questions yet. So the lady says, if you need anything, hold your hand up in front of the camera, and I'll come and get you. And then we bickered about how I can't have more than 1 piece of paper, like I'm going to steal state secrets or something, right? But it is what it is. Struggled through it, passed it, left, never go back again. But this is the type you're going to see. You're going to see a scenario. It may have some models that are drawn on it, some architectures, or you may have to draw your own architectures to conceptualize it. And you're going to see about 15 questions that are specific to that scenario. And these are the ones where I'm talking about you can't mark these and go back. Once you answer those questions, you'll be prompted that says you can't go back after you click OK. You click OK. That's closed. That's done. It's history. You either did well or you didn't. But then you have other questions that are coming that you can flag and mark. It's just the scenario-based ones you can't. So next we're going to talk about the design, the real-time data processing solutions. And this gets a little bit more fun, right? This is, we're talking about Storm, where we got real-time analytics, streaming queues. This is, again, Kafka is your service bus event hub. Again, bidirectional versus one-way type of scenarios where we have IoT, where we could have some fraud detection. Some of these scenarios may be still based on a machine learning component being in the solution. Don't worry about it. It's still applicable to these scenarios, right? So if we're talking about real-time fraud detection, it doesn't matter what the technology is underlying. We're going to still be able to use this type of scenario in it. Excuse me. Intrusion detection is another type of scenario, ETL. A lot of customers, probably several in this room, want to be able to get to a near real-time type of data warehousing solution, right? Practical speaking, I would say that you should really be careful if your financials are based on that, right? Batch-based processing is safe. It doesn't mean that in a solution like this, when we apply a Lambda type architecture, especially if we're looking at a big data lake store and we're connected to a SQL data warehouse with a Hadoop cluster, that we can't have data that's streaming in and create a view on top of that, say with Polybase, that gives the users insight into what's going on in real time. And then I've got a slide that I built for this. It'll explain a little bit better in detail, I think. You need to understand, again, design and provision compute resources. This is not the storage mechanism. This is how we configure the actual compute mechanism, right? So we want real-time event processing, real-time event storage, and it may be very volatile in nature, the storage, right? Because it may be transitive. It's coming in, it has some data, we got an aggregate, send it along, dispose of the other data. You're going to want to understand when and where and how to configure the cluster sizes, right? On-demand scale out, which may be done with PowerShell. It may be done with some type of job inside of Azure that's triggered by an event in your database. It could be a lot of different things. You're not going to see a lot of deep complexity in this exam. It's just a good idea to understand the basic architecture with how that may apply. And then resource assignment. I think this is bigger in the SQL data warehouse space where you may have role groups, resource groups, that kind of stuff. But still you've got resource assignment where you may actually have a larger cluster or a different type that's going to an edge node in this case to do some type of activity. And then kind of jump into Lambda architecture here because it's important. And I get rid of the old slide because it was really archaic. And I kind of put this one a little bit together because I think when you apply it to Azure, it makes a little bit more sense. And it's basically, it's supposed to be generic, fault tolerant, and scalable outwardly, right? To where we can support a wide range of workloads. This is something that was developed not by Microsoft, I think more on the Amazon side, and they've done a heck of a job at it, right? They've got Lambda functions as well, which is almost like a serverless, which is where everybody's kind of going. But when we talk about a batch layer, this is where Azure SQL comes into play, SQL Data Warehouse. You've got Hadoop HD Insight that's coming into play there, blob storage, and then of course that folder with the lightning bolt. Anybody know what that is? Is your data lake? Yeah. So each one of these little things actually, they're pretty handy to have. And then you got Data Factory that may be the ingestion engine in that case, or Event Hub, which is the little symbol down at the bottom. And that's really where we have our real-time views, our speed layer, if you will. That may be completely using Stream Insight to feed the data directly into Power BI. And then we may have machine learning where we have an event that's coming even from either one of this, either the batch layer or the speed layer, that's taken a trained algorithm, trained machine learning algorithm, and doing some fraud detection or some type of analysis on it, and could just give you basically like just a result saying, you know, flag this one, right? And then on that, it may actually put it through a serving layer, which may do some additional aggregation processing, or also, you know, reference type data inside of that. So the key principles of the Lambda, store all the data in its rawest form possible. I think this is just a data warehousing principle altogether, right? If you can store data at its lowest grain, then you're always going to be able to aggregate it to a higher level. With the MPP data lake technologies that we have, it's so much easier to just store it as it came. I think there's a little bit of log files that we're kind of storing kind of haphazardly because we have no known value to that. But if I have my production data that's coming in its rawest form, and I'm able to store that, something changes and I need to rehistorically visit that, I can restate it or do a what-if analysis based on new kind of objectives or scenarios that the business might give me. The master data is immutable, doesn't change, it's master data, right? The data set's fully normalized. Again, I didn't design this architecture, but I think these are foundational even with data warehousing in a lot of cases. At least they should be. The data is true in perpetuity. Each piece should have a timestamp. It is what it is, how it was, always will be, that kind of stuff. Data follows a fact-based model where the data piece is atomic and time-stamped, and then each fact data piece is distinguishable, adding nonce, random numbers as needed. The Lambda architecture is all about speed, right? We want incremental update constrained to the speed layer. We want the speed layer. It does trade accuracy for low latency, so it's really about getting it in there, getting it quickly, and not creating congestion, right? We don't want the people at the toll booth having to wait 20 seconds to get that little green light, right? That could create some problems. It only looks at recent data. If you need to look anything further, that's where you go to a batch layer or a storage layer to actually get that data. And it allows random writes, and the results, again, are always transient with that. And this is where, I don't think you've seen it with Cosmos DB yet, but I think you're probably going to see it get on here even more because of how it's changing. But when we talk about partitioning data, especially having geodata and a speed layer like that, the speed factor of that, as well as the, it's not as transient. It's actually more sustainable, and it's not, it's not volatile at that point. It's much more capable of it. Batch layer, is anybody not a data warehouse person in here? Okay. So the batch layer's second nature for data warehousing, right? It's what we do. We look at all the data at once. When we're talking about this is, and CTAS, if you're an MPP type person, CTAS is a common term. Create table is select. To the SQL Server folks, it's a select into, but it's a distributed select. So it's very fast, very powerful. But we look at all the data at once, right? This is where we may actually, versus doing an incremental load, do a full trunk reload of 20, 30 years of data. We have that capability. The batch layer will always and eventually correct the speed layer. So this is like a book and bill system. If someone fat fingers an order and then 20 minutes later, this is why we can't have real time, right? Who wants to run to the CFO and say, we just had a $20 million order booked, only to find out half an hour later, someone fat fingered, it was $20. And you know, that's not the way to do it. So the batch layer always corrects that. We balance that out by backing it out, just simple accounting piece that's coming there. The serving layer provides the denormalized views. Those are continually produced from the batch layer and intended to support random access reads. So this is saying that if we have a denormalized structure that's coming in to that, and we have a slowly changing dimension type of process, then it can actually pick up something new, allow it to be agile, implement it into it without breaking everything. Now that event itself may trigger another event that sends it to a data steward that says, what's up with this? We got this new record, what do we do with it? And at that point, they can go back and restate it, correct it, or rebalance it with something else, right? Recategorize it. So that's always important. Data warehousing, Lambda, doesn't matter. It's just good fundamental practice. Batch and serving layers are available, but not consistent in the face of a network partition, CAP theorem. You're not going to get into any theorem on this in the exam. This is just for your knowledge. So let's see. And then, of course, functional summary, batch view, real-time view, query. There will be nothing on the exam that's related to any of this. I don't know why I put it on here. But I wanted to show the Azure provides many options for each layer. I remember, I inherited this deck. Yes? Yes, yes. The deck will be available either later today or tomorrow, but yeah, it'll be available. It'll also be updated in the next month because things are changing again. So just so you know, if you don't take the exam in the next quarter, it's liable to change. Again, if you go to the site, and I can show you after I'm done here, but if you go to the site where it actually shows the Microsoft certification where it says pay $165 to take this exam, if you look through that, it'll have a document. And what I would recommend, go to that document. It's going to show you the latest changes to this exam, and it's going to show you every category of the exam. What I would recommend is you take that, print it off, go to Azure, the documentation part, and search for each one of those pieces and put the links to it and use that as your study guide because it's a perfect format to study. And once you're done comfortable with that, if you really want that second review, take a measure up. Measure up is what we use internally at Microsoft. It's a great exam, and it's pretty close to the actual. It's not perfect. It has typos just like the real exam. And it's actually nicer than the real exam, I think, the way it's structured. But content-wise, it's very close. Creepily close in some cases. But it's good. This is a good high-level view, especially if you want to look at it, I think, separately from the exam. It's good for the exam as well. Power BI, when you look at the analytics clients, you're not going to see a lot of questions that are specific to the analytics side of it, right? It's just a piece. It's the lipstick on the pig at the end of the day, right? It's the effort of all of our hard work. Notice I put a big strike through this section. No longer on the exam. So I'll just jump through these pieces I spent a lot of time on. It still has a, yeah, I know. I actually took the exam again just to test it, and it still had it on there, not even 2 months ago. So I could go through the section. It's nothing to do it just in case, but I can tell you that it's around the Azure machine learning piece that's in Azure. This is gonna stay out there, but I can tell you that monthly, that the algorithms that are on that left side there are changing constantly, and they're improving. It's good. I mean, the text analytics piece didn't exist 6 months ago, and now it's actually really refined. But I think you guys heard an announcement about Vienna, the workspace. That's kind of the new thing. It's not going to replace this. It's going to be a way to do it locally and then deploy it. So you'll have, and it will work with Python up front. So NumPy and Pandas, all that stuff will be kind of the status, right? But this piece is not bad. And it's funny, I talked to a lot of data scientists. Do we have any data scientists in the room? Because one of the things I hear complaint regularly from them, and I chuckle at it, is they complain that I spend all my time cleaning this data and then putting it in a structure I can use it. I'm like, welcome to my world. I mean, that's where, as a consultant, that's where all the work is, right? It's not the fun stuff, it's the rigor, right? So what's really nice about this tool, if you haven't used it, and you want to get some experience with it, look at the edx.org, edX. We have a Microsoft Professional program, and you can audit it for free. But it's a certification program that's more long-term, and it focuses around, we have 3 tracks. One's on applications, one's on big data, and then there's one on data science. I've done the data science and the big data. And it was actually a lot of fun because you go through the Excel, the Power BI, the Hadoop, you also do the machine learning, and at the end you have a competition where all of your classmates, you compete with the same data set and you're trying to create the best predictive model. And it's a little stressful because everybody sees your score, you know, and where you rank, but it kind of becomes fun after. I've waited until like the last 10 days. I probably should have been doing it for the 20 days prior, but it's really neat because you can submit as many times a day as you want, and you can improve that model, and you find that you overfit the model, right? And you have to adjust for that. But it's actually a lot of fun. Yes?
Where did you rank?
Where did it depended on the day of the week, but in the final ranking, I ranked above pass. And as I was finishing my graduate and going through PhD interviews, I was happy to have that pass. I didn't care, honestly. It didn't count towards my GPA in the real world, so I was good. I like to learn, so it's just a thing. But I would highly recommend it if you haven't had the experience to play, even with some of the SQL Server. If you have users that are confused about SQL Server, it's one of the best SQL Server courses. I've been with SQL Server since it was on OS2 Warp. Before that, I was with Oracle 7.1. It's one of the best ones I've seen. It's simple, it's direct, and it focuses on the SQL. So it's good. This last section is the operationalize. It's always about operationalize and repeatability, right? If we can't repeat something, it's not scientific. If it's not a repeatable process, it's probably not worth doing the first time, is my rule of thumb. And it's probably way too futile to worry about too much. This is where we're talking about not the one time, here's your data, cleanse it, load it into it. It's about repeating that pattern, making it to where it's foolproof. And where we can deploy it, create a run book for it, hand it off to other people that get paid much less to worry about that kind of stuff. And then they call and escalate it when they need to at the guy that gets $300 an hour to come in, and I have to justify that. So this is where Data Factory, if you don't like it, you gotta at least learn to like it a little bit because it's getting better, and it actually is all JSON based underneath. It's a pretty powerful engine. I think we've gotten spoiled with some of the GUIs. I myself used to hate GUIs, and they save time. I mean, that's why I did them now. But it's really about being able to handle events as they happen, be able to handle like a 70-30. We want it to productionize 70. Then if we have an exception in that 30%, we can handle that event gracefully, right? And that's really what this is about. And then being able to monitor and alert in the situations in that 30% where we do have it. If we see activity that's spiking, fortunately Azure, if it sees some type of intrusion coming into it, there's intrusion events that are added to this exam now that are going to actually be part of it. I think it'll be a simple question, how do you enable intrusion detection, that kind of stuff. But know that it's probably going to be in there more and more. But you're probably going to see some questions about logs as they come in. There's logs for everything. Everybody that's connected to Azure, there's a log that's being generated. And they're just not enabled by default, right? It may be a little bit overbearing. And you'll probably see scenarios around that. But you're not going to see detailed questions like enable logging for this specific event. You're going to see enable logging, right? And then storage keys. Maintenance is a big piece. And this is also part of the security, right? So one of you could say that it's a weakness or a strength of blob storage is that it has keys, right? It has a primary and a secondary key. Never share your primary. The primary is your key. Share the secondary key. That way, if you create a blob storage for a partner, customer, someone that's paying you, and they don't pay you, change the secondary key. Don't break yourself. That kind of thing. It may break their access. Then they call you, say, I need that data. baby, we're good to go. Here's the key. And you can change it back to the original key at that point, right? You have control of that. So understanding that. With Data Factory, Data Management Gateway, again, redundant, setting up a hybrid environment is critical, right? Because in most cases, I'd say 99% of the cases, we're coming from brick and mortar shops, right? Anybody starting a cloud in here? I mean, it'd be nice if you're drawing a line in the sand, we're going to start a new company, and we're going to start in the cloud. Great, awesome, right? You're going to save yourself a lot of money and time. But in the real world, we're in a hybrid scenario. And thankfully, at least from my end, SQL Server is very good at the hybrid world because we have stretch database, we have other things. But when we talk about setting up data management gateway and we have a Teradata server, then data management gateway can be set up. If we have an Oracle server, data management gateway has a connector for that. We bought a company years and years ago, and we've been implementing them into it as part of it. You probably heard of Metanautics at one point in time. So data management gateway, all these tools actually have components of that built into it. So it's amazing. If you look at Power BI, has anybody played with Power BI? I hope, yeah. So you guys have seen all the connections you have to data management gateway is getting the same way. Just like what should be called document DB, which is the metadata repository. It can connect to Netezza, Exadata, Hadoop, a lot of different things. And then anything it can't connect to, it can use OData feeds or it can use RESTful APIs. So it covers a broad brush there. Job scheduling, I think that's a big strength. When we talk about SSIS, historically, it's always been weak, kind of on data lineage, right? That's a strength of Data Factory. Data lineage is kind of overbearing in Data Factory in a lot of ways. So I know exactly where it came from when it tried to move, if it was successful or not, and it's out of the box. So that's something that's a strength of it. Pipeline errors, this is just like any other ETL type of structure. This is not an ETL tool per se, it's an orchestration engine. And there's a fine line between what an orchestration and an ETL engine are. But this does have errors. It can be graceful or it can be pretty catastrophic depending on how you handle it. But alerts, event monitoring, all that stuff is part of Data Factory. And like I said, there was some new releases to the product this week that are actually in the positive, so take another look. If you don't like Azure, come back a month later and check out the same tool. It's probably changed. Don't worry about 2016. Don't worry about too much syntax. I say that lightheartedly because you will see some syntax, but the syntax won't be where you have to select necessarily the proper complete statement. You'll see syntax that'll be kind of a PowerShell script and you will fill in the blanks with a drop down. So it's not that hard. But it won't be a single response. It'll be at least 2 responses in that. And if you miss one, the whole question's wrong. Data Lake and SQL DW. I wrote this 6 months ago, so I say Data Lake and SQL DW lightheartedly because Data Lake at the time did not allow you to use it as a primary store for Hadoop. Now that it does, you may see more of it. Last time I took it, like he said, it's got machine learning stuff on it. So it may be based on the center that you're getting it from. But again, this is where going to where you're going to take the test and actually executing that test at is important, right? But don't sell yourself short. Don't take the exam, practice and study for it, and then wait 2 months to take it again because it may change. I think I said it, but there's funding for these exams for the next 2 years to update them every quarter. So how that gets deployed, I'm a field guy, so I don't know. I don't do that. So parting thoughts. I think we're a little bit ahead. I don't know has become I don't know yet. Anybody know who said that? Come on. Bill Gates said that. It's a Microsoft conference, right? I don't have any Satya quotes yet. I think these go without saying. Read the questions, understand the questions. Don't skim like I do with my emails and everything else. Read the question, understand what it's asking, Sometimes I'll actually go to the actual question at the bottom first, and then I'll actually go back to it and read the scenario, and that helps me. And like I said, when these scenario-based questions come out, they are not going to be, unless you're fortunate you find a place that has a decent-sized monitor, you're going to be panning around that screen to read the entire question and the responses. It's frustrating. But if you understand the question, then you can go back and skim a little, pick up details. There are details when we're talking about DB1, DB2, source 1, source 2, that kind of stuff that you're going to be able to pick up. We're not trying to trick you on any of these. I've helped with preparing a couple of these exams. The goal is to make sure that you're competent. That's all it is. It's not to make sure that, ooh, we can stump them on this, right? There's nobody that wants to do that because we want you to succeed, right? We want you to use a tool. Think the scenarios through. And if you're an architect or DBA, don't overthink it. Just think of it like if you were answering out of the book, what is the correct answer? Don't say, well, you know, in this scenario, please, that's not what they're asking for. They're asking for what is the out of the book, by the book answer. And relax, it's just a test. No one's going to be standing over you, waiting to jump on you when you, well, your boss is mine, I don't know. At Microsoft, we have a concept of fail fast, learn from it, move forward, right? If anybody's beating you up over this, tell them to give me a call. I'll talk to them because this is about our career, right? And I say that lightly because when we're training for these exams, I'm just as bad for it. We hear about work-life balance and all that stuff, and it's important, though, that you focus and put your efforts because no one cares about your career as much as you do, or should care about your career as much as you do. So set the time on your calendar for study. Follow that calendar. Don't let people take it. I set it to private now because people used to look at my calendar and schedule things for me, and that's frustrating. But again, it's just a test. If you don't succeed first, retake it. And I want to say that it varies. When they're first released, they're pretty low, even internally. And Microsoft, what we tell the guys is take the test, fail it, and learn about it, right? Because we get vouchers, fortunately, for these exams and stuff. But it's still, when it first, my exam before these certifications, my last certification was with SQL Server 6.5. So to me, it wasn't important to maintain a certification. I've been doing this for a while, but anybody that's in the field that's technical at Microsoft has to maintain certifications now. And with work and life and everything else, it actually came to a point we had a deadline with our role guides that had to be done. And there were a lot of people that were waiting till last minute. I was one of them, to actually go. I took it. There's a cycle where you can't reschedule it within a certain amount of time. And when I scheduled it, I had just come off vacation, and I literally had like 4 days, and if I failed it, I was toast. So I passed it the first time, so I was happy. But I know the first time that people took it, it was probably about a 40-ish success rate. And most of those people studied for a good solid month before they took it. People that didn't study, I'd say the pass rate was probably 8 to 10%. And those were big data people. Yes?
Can you get those lunches? Is there a second pass then?
I used to think that there always was. I can tell you that if it's in beta, there is not. But if it's something's released, it turns out that it's a campaign that they do, I think, to pick up the testing. If you schedule it, apparently if you do it here, it's 50% off. But if you schedule it outside of here, I think it's 40% off. So you can schedule it like a month out and get 40% off. If you go to the room beside here, they have 473, 475, and they have 776, which is the next level on this one, on big data, which is in beta now. So you won't even see the score for that 6 to 12 weeks after we actually release the exam. So it's,
Can you take the beta exam?
you can. You can.
Is it for free or
I don't think so. It is for me, but I don't think it is for, I don't think it's free. But I'm not sure with beta exams, honestly. But 50% off is not bad. Yes?
For studying
edX, yes.
And are there any books that you recommend for this?
For 475, you know, it covers so many topics with big data that it really is hard. I think the best, let me see if I can show you, the best places to go, and let me see, I'm trying to get this to stop presenting so I can show you my screen here. The best places to go is actually the training site and Azure, I think. This is not letting me do that. Let's see if I can use functions here. Okay, here we go, duplicate. We're gonna break his system here. So if you go to like this place, this is a great place to get what the latest updates are. And this is where I was talking about download and review 475 changes, because it comes as, you can see it right here. It's gonna have all the different categories, and it's gonna have strike-throughs with anything. And if you see something like where we put an acronym before, like TDE, it may say Transparent Data Encryption now, so they'll modify it in those cases. But if you take this and say, what I would do is go to the Azure site from here. And from here, this is the best place. All of our documentation, whether it's APS, SQL 2016, 2017, all that stuff, is right here now. It may be a little bit hard to find, but if you go onto here in the documentation, you can go to the bottom right-hand side. It says View All your resources, and then it's going to be categorized. It'll take a second. Why is it not showing it? This may be this tool we have here. But if you come here, there's always more than one way to get to our stuff here. This is the different databases. So if you want to look at something like, say, SQL Data Warehouse, then if you say like T-SQL statements, this is really good if you have not seen this before, because if you look up top, you're going to see SQL servers, Azure SQL Data Warehouse database, and you're going to see checkboxes for which ones are applicable to. It's important because this is our Books Online now, if you're familiar with Books Online, for every product. So this should be your first source for information. I guarantee you that most people that are authoring books and stuff are either reaching to the product group, which updates this directly, or they're coming here directly. And the nice thing I like is that if you want to plan your timing, each one of these also tells you how long it takes to read through this. And there's some great scenarios in here. But what I would do is I would start with the Azure and the documents, and I don't know what I just did. We've got way too many sites, I think. The documentation, this is where I always go to. And then I would start, if you can't find it over here on the left side, each one of those pieces of documents that you select, you have the option to download it as a PDF. Sometimes I find it easier to download as a PDF and then search that. But I typically will come up here, and I think I entered the, yeah. So I do a search up there, and it's more broad ranging in that case. So, but you can see StreamSets data collector for HD Insight. This is going to have some new stuff that may not be on the exam, but if it's about learning, it's about learning, right? Second, I would say, if you haven't done pricing and stuff on this, and you're trying to figure out what our true cost is going to be on this, this pricing calculator is what every salesperson within Microsoft uses. I have to teach them how to use it regularly. TCO calculator is pretty new, but even this pricing calculator, they update regularly. But if you want to know the true costs of like Azure, and you want to do, say, some cold store with hot store, and you want to set up that Lambda structure, and you want Express Route, which gives you the direct connection to it, and you're talking about a multi-site, think about it like egress charges, right? It's not something that comes out immediately, but if you move data from one data center to the next, you've got an egress charge there, and it's small, but if it's terabytes of data, it can add up over time, right? So if you're talking about a distributed architecture where you want each data mart located geographically, may be good, and your enterprise data warehouse may be located centrally, but that's where you want to be able to charge back those costs, and this gives you a true picture of what that cost can be, and it's not trying to hide anything or doctor it up, and it allows you to kind of look at it. Another piece I would look here in the documentation is this architecture. We have lots of architectures out here, best practices, patterns, and stuff, which is relatively new. And they're not complete. I'd say they're evolving, some of them, but these are proven architectures that we've used with different things where, again, there's a lot of content out here, but it's a great place to search. MeasureUp's a great exam. I've used it on 473, 475. 776 doesn't exist yet, and I've got the content for that, but this is actually pretty good. There was something else. Let me see. Excuse me. So yeah, I mean, just pulling on that. Oh, I know what it was. Updates. Azure updates regularly. So if you say updates in this little search thing, you're going to see that you're going to be able to see all the product updates by product. It's usually Azure updates. And here I can say the products. And this is an important spot because these product teams, there's a lot of product teams at Microsoft. If you've ever not been to the campus in Redmond and Bellevue, it's a pretty big campus by any campus standards. And there's different buildings, each team's in different buildings. Within data and AI, there's a lot of collaboration, but they still have different release schedules, right? So if it's poly-based, there's gonna be a little bit more interaction between the teams. But if I wanna know, like, and I can tell you that Azure Data Lake and Blob Store, they are very similar in nature. They're two different teams, and it's almost like they compete for, for the same business, which is good, right? Competition's good. So it's kind of neat with that. But if you want to see like Data Lake Store, you can say update type. And this is where it gets really in detail. And I just want to really see all the updates to the platform. And I just say all. And it'll actually give me all the updates by month and by the actual update. It's a little bit easier, I think, for a lot of people for SQL Data Warehouse, for instance. Like if I want to know if identity is supported because it wasn't 2 months ago, I don't care about the OS there. Here I can see each one of these, like in varchar max, right? And that's now supported as of September 21 with external tables. So these are important updates, and it shows the kind of the convergence because there is a difference between the code base of SQL Data Warehouse and SQL Server. SQL Data Warehouse is a cloud-born technology. It was born in the cloud. It's an MPP technology, and it's similar to APS and PDW, which are the same technology. But there are several technologies in Azure that never existed in anywhere except the cloud. And to me, those are the ones, if I was going to target it, those are the technologies I would look at first if I want to be in the cloud, because there's always going to be some convergence that has to happen before that. But there's a lot of parity between these two code bases now. And it's much better than it was between SQL Server and APS. SQL DW and SQL Server they're on the same original code base, which is good. But if you click on these, what's really cool about this, like identity was a big piece, right? If you look at this, it'll actually go into detail and it'll show what is currently not supported. And a lot of times, the product group itself will blog about this feature and the feature sets. And there's also a place where you can make recommendations. I'd like to see this feature. And they look at that daily. I can tell you that for a fact. And they'll rank them. It's an agile technology, right? We're an agile shop. So everything cream rises to the top. People start raising cane, we need this, we need this. It gets escalated up. So the next time they plan that, it's important to them. So they value feedback from customers very much. So. Mm-hmm.
I'm looking to do this certification so that I can learn and move to a job which does Azure
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of trying to see where I should start. If I'm just going by books, I don't have. I can sign up for an Azure account, but if I'm doing it on my own and it's not implemented at work, there's only so much I can do.
This is true. I've always maintained my Dream Spark. I think they've renamed it through college. And what I've had, I do mentoring through MSSA, which is a Microsoft Software and Systems Academy, and it brings active duty military into the technology field. And they have the same problem because they go through kind of a university on base, their active duty. And what I recommend to them, it's not that much. I know there is a cost associated with it, but you can get like a 90-day account, and there's offers always out there. But what I recommend is finding a community college. I tell these guys, go to the college. Most of these places have DreamSpark or some type of account with Azure that's set up, and it's not full featured, but for some of the big data stuff, it'll give you credits for like $150 a month or $200 a month, where you can use an Azure resource manager. You can learn a lot doing it. And the cost is usually just registering to that college, which is small, and then registering for a class. And it takes a little bit of time, but I would do the trial. And I have a trial as well with my DreamSpark, and they're pretty good about, like, if I want to spin up a Hadoop cluster, I have to enter a credit card, which I was not happy about, right? Nobody is. But they've never charged me anything. I'm sorry?
How old you ran out of the trial?
Okay. Shoot me an email, and I'll do a search, because we do have other offers. And if you do the edX, the edx.org, I'm pretty sure that they give people that sign up for that, it may be like $25 a class or whatever. I think it may have went up. But you do get a certification, just like Microsoft certification at the end, that you can share on LinkedIn, your resume, and that kind of stuff. But I'm fairly positive that for the big data one, you have to have Hadoop, right? And as students, they don't expect you to have an expensive Hadoop account. I think they give you a 60 or 90 day, maybe a 6-month, like light duty account where it gives a couple. But if you shoot me an email, it's just James H. at Microsoft. I can definitely send it out. It's easy email, Jamesh at Microsoft. But we do have, and we have partners that put the stuff. Have you been to the Expo? Several of those guys I've seen actually offer some trial type stuff. And it may, one thing I would recommend too, especially about the big data, is maybe look at the, and this I'm just thinking here, is the Azure Stack is an appliance-based solution that gives you the look and feel of Azure, that allows you to spin up clusters and stuff. But it's still in like a preview, like a CTP type stuff. So the bits can be installed on like a virtual machine or a server at home, and then you can spin up like a Hadoop cluster at home, and it's going to have the same look and feel. There's going to be some little intricacies difference, but it's not going to be enough to hurt you on the exam or learning about the product. So I know that's a stretch, but I'm trying. Any other questions? I think I finished 5 minutes already. Guys, thanks for your time. Wish you best of luck on the exam.